Hello, welcome to the Talking Michigan Transportation Podcast. I'm Jeff Cranston. This week, I spoke with Dr. Timothy Gates at the Michigan State University College of Engineering about a recent study he and his colleagues completed on skid season, so-called in some media reports about it. Basically, this study looked at whether flashing LED lights can make a difference in driver behavior on curves. Obviously, anybody who drives knows that there are more crashes on curves, especially in the wintertime when slippery conditions might be present. But this study really looked at what kinds of things will help drivers slow down and be better prepared to drive safely through the curves. A stunning number of crashes occurred on curved roadways during the winter weather conditions between 2018 and 2022. The state tallied more than 128,000 crashes in that time period. At least 175 of those were serious injuries and fatalities. So Dr. Gates talks about what went into the study, what the findings helped prove, and what they'll be looking at in the future. I hope you enjoy the conversation. As promised, I'm back with Dr. Timothy Gates, who is a professor in the civil engineering program at Michigan State University. He's been on the podcast before to talk about various studies. He's all about finding ways to make transportation safer, which is paramount, obviously, for anybody involved in the Department of Transportation. Dr. Gates, thanks again for coming on the podcast.
Well, you're very welcome, Jeff, and thank you for the invitation.
So, as I mentioned in the introduction, what caught my eye this time was a study from Dr. Gates and his colleagues at Michigan State on how flashing LED lights can make a difference in how drivers approach curves. On the surface, this kind of sounds like one of those obvious things that we should all know, like no kidding. But we need studies oftentimes to validate things that we think we know, and sometimes they don't, and we get surprises. So talk about that, I guess, first of all, the findings, what led to the study in the first place, and if anything out of that surprised you.
Yeah, well, thanks, Jeff. Really good question. And, as a transportation person, we always hear that the flashing light is one of the last longest standing and last types of driver alert mechanisms that we have that still remains effective. And those flashing lights are effective, but they're even more effective if they're activated in an on-demand situation, like either due to, a driver approaching at too fast of a speed, or like a weather sensor, so a pavement sensor, or a weather sensor that senses when the weather and the pavement surface is potentially going to be slippery, and it activates that sign. So when we have the combination of the flashing light and having it activated in an on-demand sense, so only when needed and not flashing all the time 24/7, then that's really still perceived as one of the best driver alert mechanisms that we have out there. And so this started with, so when we talk about combining the flashing signs or the flashing lights, there's a few different ways we can portray that to motorists. You can either have the flashing beacon on top of the sign, which is the most common. But more recently, in the last 20 years, they've actually embedded LED lights in the border of the sign. And you've probably seen those around. They're oftentimes used in airports or, maybe at pedestrian crosswalks, sometimes even, for warning signs, but much less frequently for warning signs. But so there's two different types of common types of flashing lights that are integrated within the sign. When we started with the flashing sign, we started a series of projects about 8 or 9 years ago for the Michigan DOT, where we were looking at different technologies, different warning technologies. And that really started with the speed feedback signs that you see, the radar your speed signs that gives you when you're approaching the sign. We see them in around school zones, municipalities, and even some curves and exit ramps in Michigan. And that's where we started with MDOT, was looking at those speed feedback signs that would come on when a driver's traveling too fast for the curve. We started that project, I believe, in 2017, looking strictly just at speed feedback signs at ramp curves. And then out of that spun a bunch of follow-up projects, one of which was looking at evaluating MDOT's current bridge deck warning systems, which were, again, like bridge may be icy sign that had the LEDs and the borders that would only activate when the pavement sensor, the environmental sensor, would sense that the pavement was below a certain friction number. And we found, so we did a pretty extensive winter evaluation in, I believe it was 2021 and 2022 for MDOT, and found that those signs were very effective. But there were issues with the brightness of the LED lights. So, for example, a lot of times the bridges, when they ice over, like with black ice, and you can't see it, that's oftentimes in the morning time when, there's just been a little bit of condensation and freezing overnight on the bridge deck. Maybe when the sun's coming up and it's, so we had some issues with the brightness of those lights, but overall, they were still fairly effective at reducing speeds approaching that bridge deck. That then prompted the project that we're going to talk about today, which is looking at the use of or evaluating MDOT's use of what we call a slippery curve warning sign. I mean, it's not really that technical, but basically what it is a slippery when wet sign, which we probably have familiarity with, that has the LED borders and is activated by a pavement sensor that detects when the friction of the surface of the pavement is below a certain value. And so we just wrapped that particular project up. It was evaluating MDOT at the time has only had 2 of such systems implemented. One was on M32 west of Gaylord, which was the focus of our study. And then there was another one on I-75 nearby, just a little bit north of Gaylord towards Vanderbilt and Wolverine, that also had a flashing, series of flashing chevrons. We did not evaluate that one because there was, I believe it was out of service during our evaluation. So we just strictly looked at this one system west of Gaylord. And that's kind of how we got to where we are. So.
And that's a heavily traveled stretch of 2-lane road in the wintertime. I can tell you, everybody that comes up from Southeast Michigan, Metro Detroit, to either snowmobile or make their way to Boyne Mountain gets off at 75 on.
That's exactly right. Yep. Yeah. And there's a series of curves through there that are quite sharp. And we all know, especially you've seen it in the news the last couple of years, Gaylord has seemed to have been kind of the epicenter for severe weather, both, with last year and this year getting nearly 2 feet of snow over Thanksgiving, and then ending the winter season in March, April, whenever it was that they had the very significant ice storm. So yeah, they do get a lot of, and let's face it too, like, plows can't be everywhere at all times. And so if you have these locations that are maybe a little bit of a distance from a plow yard, or that are maybe not as high a priority as, say, I-75, where you'd have your workers on I-75 plowing and de-icing as much as possible. So certain areas, we need other things to help. If we're not able to get out there and clear the snow and ice as quickly as we can, maybe have another treatment that will alert motorists. Now, again, it gets back to the fact that you really only want to turn that alert on when it's needed, right? So determining when it's needed is because otherwise drivers will disregard it. If it comes on and it's not slippery and it's, like the crying wolf type thing. And then suddenly there actually is the wolf, there is a pretty, significant amount of black ice out there, and you end up running off the road and, colliding with whatever. So anyways, that's where we're at with this particular one.
It's one more way to, this is why I know traffic safety engineers, and I think people who teach in colleges of engineering and talk about safety don't like it when somebody says that road is dangerous, or that curve is dangerous, or that intersection is dangerous. It's only dangerous if you don't drive appropriately for conditions, right?
Well, that's very true. Yep.
And so what you're trying to do with these devices and techniques is help people be better drivers.
Right. That's exactly right. And there were actually 2 components. There were several components to the most recent project that we did for MDOT, which was looking at speed warning technologies in rural areas. And we looked at a variety of horizontal curve warning strategies. We looked at several implementations of speed feedback signs on exit ramps along I-94, which were implemented based on the recommendations of our prior study that wrapped up in 2020 or 2021. We looked at the use of feedback signs on freeway mainline curves. There are, to my knowledge, were none that existed. So we did some temporary installations on freeway mainline curves around Mount Pleasant on US 127. And then we also, MDOT had recently implemented a flashing chevron warning system based on drivers approaching at too high of a speed. Several curves in the Irish Hills along US 12, like I think it was like Napoleon or Brooklyn area. There was 4 such curves that were implemented through there. I'm sorry, 2 curves, and they were directional eastbound and westbound systems.
Explain chevrons for the uninitiated.
Yeah, so similar to like the speed feedback sign. So the chevrons, as you go through the curve, you see the black and yellow, kind of just like an arrow, but it's a truncated arrow. So this is a chevron showing you the path through the curve that you need to follow. And these were, for lack of a better term, kind of sneaky type curves where you couldn't necessarily see just how significant the curvature was. And so MDOT, this is in the university region, had a contract to install these new flashing chevron systems. Now, they, again, like I said before, they don't flash at all times, right? Because they would get disregarded if they flash at all times. But there was a radar sensor that was positioned a little bit in advance of the curve that would detect if a motorist was traveling too fast for the curve, and then would start to flash them, if it was detected that they were traveling above that threshold speed, in hopes that they would reduce their speed and, travel safely through the curve. Now, one thing we did test on that, because there's not a lot of specific guidance at the federal level in the MUTCD, the Manual of Uniform Traffic Control Devices, is we actually tested the simultaneous flash, so all of them flash at the same time, versus the sequential chasing flash, where only one flashes at a time and they flash in a sequence. So it's like, showing you the path through the curve in sequence. And we found that there really wasn't a lot of, they both of them had speed reduction effects. There wasn't necessarily a clear trend of which one was better, which one was worse. And so these are the types of things research-wise we can take those to I also sit on the National Committee for Uniform Traffic Control Devices that provides information to the Federal Highway Administration about the MUTCD. I have shared a lot of these research results with that committee to help better inform future versions of the MUTCD. So that's the flashing chevron.
Those peer reviews are very important, and I think peer exchanges. Stay with us. We'll have more on the other side of this important message.
Michigan law requires drivers to maintain at least 200 feet behind a snowplow when crews are plowing or treating roads and have their lights on. This does not apply when passing the snowplow. In addition, stay at least 20 feet away when the plow is stopped or at an intersection. Failure to do so can result in a fine of $100. The law is meant to ensure snowplow operators have the proper space and time to clear the roads. This makes Michigan's roads and neighborhoods safer to drive on and walk around throughout the winter. Always remember, snowplows need room to groom.
So I think the statistic that jumped out at me most from the reporting on this was that more than 128,000 crashes are on curved roadways during winter weather conditions. That was just between 2018 and 2022. Now, instinctively, I would have said, certainly there are more crashes on curved segments of roadways than straightaways. But that number is astonishing. I mean, were you even surprised at the volume?
Yeah, it's quite surprising. And I mean, a lot of these are property damage. They slide off and, slide off and collide with the embankment or, tree at low speeds or something like that. But, we really try to limit these things. There's obvious reasons why curve crashes occur, right? You've got a bend in the road. And if a driver is not paying attention or traveling too fast, they, potentially slide off to the outside of the curve. And so obviously those problems are magnified when the surface friction is even lower, and magnified further if the visibility is bad. Like if you've got an active snowfall event and, if the driver's not familiar with that roadway, then it really becomes a problem. So these on-demand flashing systems are really important, and especially so for winter weather warning at these curves where regular snow and ice is a problem.
And do you think, because you talk to people in other states about this, and because, Michigan has had, like some states are doing very well. Some are struggling with funding and have been for decades, like Michigan. We know things now that we didn't know 50, 60 years ago when these roads were designed and built. And if it was about buying right of way or the difficulty and just, designing a straighter road, we really don't have the money to redesign all these roads now. So you're going to have to, there's going to be big business for figuring out how to make these curves safer for a long time, right?
Yeah, that's correct. These systems are obviously much cheaper than realigning a road, right? I think we understand that. There's a handful of things that we can do as engineers, and usually any good engineer wants to make sure that they're very aware of the costs of these things and trying to implement cost-effective treatments, because we can put more of them out there if they're cheaper, right? And we put them in more locations than, say, spending the time and expense it costs to realign the roadway, straighten things out. Of course, we'd like to have everything straight and flat, right? But we know that's not practical due to natural terrain and bodies of water and properties and property values, et cetera, et cetera. So that's why we have curves out there. They are an important part. They're never going to go away completely. So we need to come up with more low cost traffic control solutions to help guide motorists in these situations.
So talk about what's next. What's in your current portfolio, I guess, and what you'll be looking into in the future.
Sure. So just to kind of tie things up here with the winter weather treatments, every single winter weather treatment we have looked at, including the slippery curve warning system with the flashing LED sign borders. Those are we recommended that MDOT and other agencies continue to implement them, expand the use of those systems, especially in areas that are prone to frequent severe weather conditions. And even more so areas where, maybe they're a little bit of a ways or not high priority on the plowing, plowing list or de-icing list. In terms of where we're going next, so that project wrapped up this past year. That's why you're starting to see some of the publications hit. The next project, and it's starting very soon. I don't know if we have a specific start date yet, but we were awarded it. Is a project looking at speed warning treatments for communities. So largely transitioning from the high-speed rural highway into, let's say, a small town or a rural community where there might be a crosswalk or a small downtown area or school. So these areas where drivers are basically getting drivers' attention that they need to slow down as they're approaching this small town. And we're not talking about like somebody coming into a major city like Detroit or Lansing, where it's clearly obvious that the land use is changing and you've got pedestrians but it's more these, the rural highways along, the state trunk lines coming into a rural community.
That are the main
speed transition areas.
Cities or villages. Yes.
Yep. And it just, I shouldn't say only state trunk lines, and obviously county roads do come into communities as well. But, because this is an MDOT project and MDOT has plenty of such scenarios out there where you've got the trunk line coming into a small town in a rural area, that's largely where we're going to focus. And we're not going to just focus in that speed transition area. We want to see what the impact is at the crosswalk, for example. Our drivers maintaining that low speed when they reach the crosswalk or reach the school zone or whatever it may be.
Yeah. That'll be interesting to watch too. Obviously, we can't do enough to emphasize the importance of that safe driving in open schools. So, thank you as always. It'd be interesting to watch how this next one unfolds, and I appreciate you explaining this, and I really appreciate the work that you do to try to make our roads safer. And we'll have to talk again sometime.
Well, you're welcome, Jeff. And again, thanks for the opportunity, and thanks for doing what you do, which is spreading the word about safety treatments throughout the state of Michigan and beyond.
I'd like to thank you once more for tuning in to Talking Michigan Transportation. You can find show notes and more on Apple Podcasts or Buzzsprout. I also want to acknowledge the talented people who help make this a reality each week, starting with Randy Debler, who skillfully edits the audio, Jesse Ball, who proofs the content, Courtney Bates, who posts the podcast to various platforms, and Jackie Salinas, who transcribes the audio to make it accessible to all.